Hello and welcome to India Business Hour. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Kritika joins me from our Mumbai studios. The big story tonight, India's GDP in the second quarter has slowed down to its lowest level in 9 months. Growth stands at 7.1%, which is below the 7.4% estimate of a CNBC TV18 poll. This is despite a low base in the second quarter of last year, and economists are now fearing that full-year growth could fall short of the 7% mark. In addition, the fiscal deficit data for October shows that the centre has breached the full-year target in just the first 7 months. Government is playing down fears of a fiscal slippage, saying that transitional factors will be substantially offset by the end of the year. Lata Venkatesh is here with more on the data. Lata, let's start with the GDP. What do you make of the 7.1% number?
Well, agriculture is not. 3.8% is fine. Manufacturing at 7.4% is fine. It's services that has let us down, actually, with financial services coming in barely 6.8% or thereabouts. And construction was okay at 7.8, but financial services 6.3, and trade, that's a big segment, trade, transport, communication, all those put together coming in only at 6.8%. It's a heavyweight sector, and that also slipped up. Within the services, only government services did well. If you looked at the same GDP numbers from the expenditure side, then again consumption lets you down. You thought that was the working piece, and consumption is about 55% of the GDP. That came in only at 7%. Of course, the other things, government consumption, that's private consumption, which is 7%. Government consumption, but it's only 10% of the economy. That's grown well at 12.7%. Very importantly, capital formation has done well, growing at about 12.5%. That bodes well, perhaps, in future in terms of higher productivity and more jobs. But there is not so much of optimism when you look at what can stimulate the economy going forward. The fiscal deficit numbers at 6.48 lakh crore, that's the fiscal deficit number that came for April-October. That's already 3% higher than the full year estimated fiscal deficit of 6.25 lakh crore. So where is the elbow room? It's true that fiscal deficit is always higher by the time you get to November, December, because you start spending and advance taxes come, for the heaviest advance taxes are paid in the fourth quarter. So fiscal deficit tends to come down, but here we have overshot already in October. So where is the elbow room? And you know that GST and other taxes are kind of falling short severely of estimates. Therefore, the elbow room is not there. Yes, monetary policy perhaps can help a bit, but they've just gone into a tightening mode. You can't expect the Reserve Bank to suddenly start cutting. The NBFC sector is a little maimed. So the bulk of the major economist commentary that we are getting is that this year, making it to 7% is going to be a tad tough. Why don't you listen to them yourselves?
I think if you strip out the base effect, the growth rate in second quarter is actually dipped below 7%. So that's the first point. The second point, that if you look into core GVA, which is excluding the agricultural part and the public part, that has actually now expanded at 6.6%. So that's a number which has slowed down significantly from 8.6% last quarter. So that's, I think, the lowest since Q2 of FY18. The third thing is that, the interesting thing is that if you actually break down the economy into two parts, the GVA into two parts, the nominal agricultural GVA and the nominal non-agricultural GVA, you will actually find two very contrasting trends. The nominal non-agricultural GVA has grown at 13.4%. It has slowed down a little bit, but the nominal agricultural GVA growth rate is actually at 2.8%, and that is lower than the real agricultural GVA at 3.8%. So that indicates that there is an element of rural distress, because deflator, the agricultural deflator, is negative, and it is for the first time in June 2017 that the deflator has turned negative. So I think, apart from the slowdown in the core GVA, I think the rural sector data doesn't look promising. There are also some issues on the service sector which we can come back at a later stage.
Sure, but it's very important that you point out that very rarely do you find the nominal GDP lower than, or nominal GVA lower than the real GVA, and that's happened in the case of agriculture. Dr. Sen, first thoughts after seeing the GDP numbers. Are they a disappointment? Do they indicate pain for you, or is it a passing pain?
No, I think the pain is not going to pass that quickly. The fact is that this low agricultural GVA growth, the nominal,
Yes.
is an indicator not just of what's happening in agriculture, but what's happening to agricultural incomes. And since 50% of your population is in that category, what it suggests is that the demand side of the economy is not going to be performing well anytime soon.
Okay.
That's the worrying part.
Okay. Yes, that's certainly a worry, and we are seeing it in daily marches or weekly marches, both to Delhi and in Mumbai, of farmers. But yes, that's going to affect consumption. Dr. Mundal, the consumption growth, if you looked at the GDP from the expenditure side, has come in 7% higher, whereas government final consumption expenditure is about 12.5%, and capital formation is about 7.5%. Do you find any encouragement in these, that since capital formation is good and 7% consumption growth is not a disaster, do you think we can hope for better things at all?
Yeah, first of all, let me agree with what Dr. Ghosh and Pranab said about the distress in the rural agricultural sector. But as often happens in the Indian economy, because agriculture now continues to account for a large part of the workforce, but a relatively small share of the GDP, you can have brightness on the other side while there's gloom on the rural agricultural side. And I think we are seeing that. So let me focus on the positives. I think the most important positive is that if you look at capital formation, fixed capital formation, that is now recovering as a percentage of GDP. We are now, we've crossed 30%. I'm talking about either the second quarter or the, if you will, H1, the first half. We are over 31, so not yet gone back to earlier peaks, but we are now on the recovery side. So that is on the plus part. Then if you look at sectors of value addition, I think the good thing is that a lot of it has in fact come from manufacturing, from construction, from utilities and so on. Of course, agriculture continues to grow as always at a relatively modest rate. And on the services side, the one big positive, the huge growth you're seeing is, of course, in the public services and the public expenditure. But the other services sector is relatively slower compared to Q2 this year over corresponding quarter last year, or H1 or H1 last year. So these are the positives. And my guess is that we will probably get, if you look at the second half, we'll probably get to just about 7% or maybe even a little below 7% in terms of real GDP growth for the year as a whole. But the dark side of it, if you will, the not very, happy aspect, which covers about half our population, is there in the rural sector, in the distress and agriculture, as was mentioned.
Okay. Well, I'll come back to you all for forecasting and what the government can do with the limited resource and time at its disposal. But Ashima Goyal, what would your first thoughts be looking at the numbers? Do you see any bright spots, or do you see disappointment, as many economists on the street told us?
Yes, I think that the forecast came in, the GDP growth came in lower than the forecast, means that base effect and volatility, the expected slowdown is even larger than these two factors would account for. So there is some slowdown that needs to be reversed. But at the same time, that manufacturing is growing on quite respectably on a higher base this time, means that there is some sort of sustained recovery there, and that investment is rising. But there are 2 points I want to make. One, I want to disagree with Shaumya and Pranav said, and the others about the rural distress. Because if you see, our high growth phase in the late 2000s was cut down by high food inflation. So rising agricultural productivity is very, very important in a country like India, and low agricultural prices, where food is a large part of the consumption basket. And if food inflation, you remember with MSP, food inflation is expected to go up and negative for monetary policy. That is not going to happen. To that extent, monetary policy can be more accommodative and stimulate demand. And for the rural sector, this is a problem of plenty. And which means that you have to find ways of giving farmers a larger margin in their produce, improve marketing, etc. At the same time, non-agricultural rural income, a large part of the income now comes from that, I think more than 50%. So, have initiatives there rather than think about raising rural, prices. That will not work in this situation. So there are positives in having softer food inflation also. But that brings me to the second point, that if you see in 2015-16 also, you had an investment turnaround.
Yes. And
then there was, because oil prices had fallen, real interest rates were very high, and it was post-demonetization, etc. There was a sharp fall. And manufacturing also grew really high at that year, and next year it crashed. So we have to be careful about this recovery, and it must be supported with macroeconomic stimulus. And since the government is tied with the fiscal deficit and its expenditure has been front-loaded, it's likely to go slow in the second half of the year. So monetary policy, it's very important that the real interest rate is already above 3.
Yes.
And they have to be very, very careful in changing to a neutral stance quickly so that they are able to respond as required. Because the growth signs are not very good. Growth is vulnerable and inflation is softening. So to sustain this growth, we really need some kind of macroeconomic.
Let me just discuss the fiscal numbers that came in a little while ago. The fiscal deficit for October is double what it was in the year ago. It's 54,000 crores compared to 26,000 crores. And likewise, the revenue deficit is again double, about 41,000 crores compared to 21,000 crores. The April-October fiscal deficit is already standing at 6.5 lakh crore, overshooting the full year numbers. Of course, expenditure comes earlier and tax revenues catch up, but the tax revenues are looking pretty bad. April-October tax mop-up at 10.3 lakh crore is only about 5% more than what it was year ago. So, there isn't so much of fiscal space. What do you think the government will do or can do? Will it throw fiscal discipline to the winds?
Yeah, no, I think you've actually given a very good analysis of the outlook on the fiscal front. There is really very little elbow room, in terms of, because we already used up a lot of the deficit that was budgeted for. And I don't see, a strong performance in terms of recovery of surpluses from public enterprises and so on. The dialogue is, of course, going on with the RBI on how much the government will get out of that surplus. So I don't want to go into that at this stage. But yes, I think the fiscal situation remains quite tight. And, there are a lot of headwinds out there. Of course, the oil price decline has been a big help. But there are many other problems, especially with the trade war between the US and China, and so on. So we need to be careful, and though there are obvious pressures because of election coming around the corner, I hope the government will maintain fiscal discipline. It's quite risky at present.
Thank you very much for joining me on this special discussion of the Q2 GDP numbers.
All right, Lata, thanks for taking us through that discussion. But let's get to the other big story that we have been tracking all day today. Thousands of farmers took to the streets of the national capital to protest against the centre, and their demand is the same as what various farmer groups have been demanding for the last several months now. A loan waiver and a higher minimum support price for their producer. Implementation of the recommendations of the Swaminathan panel. The difference this time is that farmer anger is growing, and that too just ahead of Rajasthan and Telangana elections. It couldn't have come at a worse time for the ruling party, clearly. Today's protest also became a show of opposition unity, from Rahul Gandhi to Arvind Kejriwal to Farooq Abdullah to Sharad Pawar. Almost the entire opposition was present there. Two things are very clear now. Farmers' distress is likely to take centre stage in 2019 and also in the upcoming winter session of Parliament. Take a look at this ground report by Parikshit.
Thousands of farmers marching from Ramleela Maidan to Parliament Street in New Delhi. They are demanding a special session of Parliament and the passage of two legislations on debt relief and minimum support price.
दक्षिण हरियाणा में पानी की काफी कमी है और जो फसलों के उचित दाम है वो नहीं मिल रहे।
किसानों को उत्पादन खर्च भर के नहीं मिलता नहीं है, लागत का खर्च नहीं मिलता, इसलिए वो आत्महत्या करता है।
200 farmer groups have gathered for a protest organized by the All India Kisan Sangharsh Committee. Activists warned the government not to take this protest lightly.
The next election is to be fought on Jawan and Kisan, then the country moves forward. If it is Hindu-Musliman, the country takes a step backward.
We want the value of our performance and the produce of our farmers and laborers to be recognized, and that is possible. They have enough money for infrastructure, which is about 20% of the population, but they don't have infrastructure for the mandis.
A protest which was about farmers' anger soon became a show of opposition unity, with the likes of Rahul Gandhi and Arvind Kejriwal attacking the Prime Minister and the NDA government.
अगर 15 लोगों का 3.5 लाख करोड़ रुपए कर्जा माफ किया जा सकता है, तो हिंदुस्तान के करोड़ों किसानों का कर्जा माफ किया जाएगा।
जितनी चिंता प्रधानमंत्री जी अंबानी और अडानी की करते हैं, उससे 10% चिंता अगर किसानों की कर लें तो किसानों की सारी समस्याओं का हल हो जाएगा, और नहीं तो फिर अगली चुनाव में मोदी जी को अंबानी और अडानी से ही वोट मांगने पड़ेंगे।
Demanding a complete loan waiver, a better MSP and cheaper prices for urea and fertilizers as well. You've got politicians also trying to draw mileage out of this protest. Clearly this will be one of the biggest issues in 2019 elections. But ahead of that, the government, the Narendra Modi government, will have to address this issue in the upcoming session of Parliament. With Bureau Journalist Narendra from Parliament Street in New Delhi, this is Parikshit Luthra.
More than 35,000 farmers take to the streets of Delhi to press for their demands. But is the centre really listening? A special discussion coming up with Yogendra Yadav of the Swaraj Abhiyan, D. Raja of the CPI, Sanjay Jha of the Congress and Syed Zafar Islam of the BJP in a short while from now. On to trading action on Dalal Street. Markets saw a gap up opening but failed to sustain that position to end flat with a positive bias. The Nifty managed to touch the 10,900 mark intraday but failed to hold that mark. The mid-caps outperformed with the index gaining more than 100 points in trade. Bank Nifty on the other hand sulked to end with cuts of 0.25%. For the week, Nifty and Sensex posted gains in all sessions. Both indices were up 3% for the week. Amongst the broader markets, Nifty Bank was up 3% while mid-caps underperformed relatively to end with gains of just 1%. The rupee was up 5.9% in November, which is the biggest monthly gain since January 2012. Let's get you an exclusive interview now. Market guru Mark Mobius says that India is at the top of the pecking order when it comes to emerging markets. He further cautions that a high interest rate environment may be a damper on earnings in the short term, but he expects earnings will catch up in the next 5 years. Take a look at that interview.
I'd love India, not because I'm on Indian TV, but because there's so many opportunities in India going forward. So we're really interested in doing more in India. So I would say India is at the top of the list. Of course, China is still important, but not as important as India in my eyes. Then you've got to go to those countries that have really bombed out, so to speak.
Okay.
Countries like Turkey, where the currency has gone down by over 70%. Places like Argentina. Of course, Brazil is high on our list. It's already jumped quite a lot from the bottom, but still it's got a long way to go. So those are the countries that interest us the most at this stage.
Okay. Well, what makes India tick for you?
First of all, diversity. You've got incredible diverse list of countries, companies in the various states. And also you've got incredible entrepreneurial activity taking place in India in many, many directions. And I think the relative openness of the Indian government to foreign investment is very, very positive.
Some investors lately have been a little exasperated by the lack of promised earnings growth. For the last 4 years, I think, analysts begin the year expecting a 20%, 25% earnings growth. And by the end of the year, it's scaled down to high single digits, sometimes even low single digits. Will that exasperate you? No,
I mean, if you look at the average for emerging markets generally, it's high single digit and then low double digit. That is common. You must remember that the high interest rate environment in India does put a damper on Indian earnings for the short term.
They're all the top market voices across the globe only on CNBC TV 18. Let's get a check of crude prices then. Crude prices continue to remain on a slippery slope right now. So Brent crude is down by about 1.5% at 58.5. And WTI NYMEX is at the 50.52 mark, down by almost 1.8%. And of course, crude prices have been tumbling at the back of increase in supplies from the United States. And that's the reason why we have seen this trend over the last 2 days. Meanwhile, the Oil Ministry has sought an additional grant of 45,000 crore rupees from the North Block to fund its kerosene and LPG subsidy for the current fiscal year. Now, the Finance Ministry feels that there is a discrepancy as far as the Oil Ministry's subsidy calculation is concerned. Sapna Das, who broke that story, is here with this. Sapna, why exactly does Finance Ministry say that there is a discrepancy, and in that case, what's the way forward?
Well, this is a bit of a tricky issue from the point of view of Finance Ministry at the moment, because the government is very committed to staying within the fiscal envelope, or at least trying to be on course as far as the fiscal maths is concerned for FY19. So big amounts, big estimates that have been put in by the Oil Ministry, 38,000 crores worth of additional LPG subsidy and 7,000 crores worth of additional kerosene subsidy. Of course, the total is as high as 45. Having said that, the sense clearly in Finance Ministry is that probably these calculations have certain discrepancies. Probably the methodology that was used in terms of coming to this number, there could be a discrepancy on that front. So the re-estimation work is going on at the moment. The sense that we have been given is, this entire amount should be lower by at least 10,000 crores. Having said that, however, there will be an additional payment that will be required to be done from the side of the government. And the sense that we are being given is that probably that may be in the tune of around 8 to 10,000 crores. But even that payment probably might happen sometime in the month of March, towards the end of the financial year, once the government has a complete fix over how the fiscal math is turning out to be. Earlier, the expectation was that something may come in the supplementary demand for grants, the second batch, which will come in the winter session of Parliament. But now we're given a sense that only in the month of March, some additional payments will be made. And whatever the unpaid amount remains as far as LPG and kerosene subsidies are concerned for FY19, that will be rolled over to the next financial year, as has been the convention.
All right, Sapna Das, thank you very much for joining us with that big breaking story. Let's move on. Yes Bank's stock has been battered in trade following a series of events. First being RBI asking Rana Kapoor to step down as the bank's MD and CEO by next year. After this, 3 of the company's directors quit and the company is facing allegations of lax corporate governance. The company's senior group president, Rajat Monga, spoke to CNBC TV 18 in an attempt to clear the air. Monga dismissed any wrongdoing by promoter entities over certain investments which have been called into question. He also made it clear that Rana Kapoor is not eyeing the post of chairman.
Clarifications that investors want. The first one is Yes Capital and Morgan Credits having invested in finance companies. I mean, okay, indirectly, they put it in Art Capital, which went into Art Housing. It's the family of the promoter, which has some of the directors in that lending company. Was RBI aware of it? Because there is an RBI rule that what a bank can do, another group company should not do. So, did you ask RBI? Is it kosher?
So let's look at the circumstances and the facts first, and RBI has access to all information, including this. So the structure of these companies is independent of the bank. It is not right to call them group companies. Okay. They are promoter companies. So they are the group companies of the promoter structure. So they're not a group company of the bank. There is no interest or dealings of the bank with these companies. Mr. Rana Kapoor, who's our CEO as well, has already conveyed his ownership in these entities to his family. So he himself has no interest in those entities either.
Mr. Kapoor does not have any interest in Morgan Credits or Yes Capital?
That's correct. So his ownership does not have any linkages to those two entities. Those two entities are entirely his family's entities. And the bank has no relationship with those companies and therefore do not entitled to be called group companies in the nature that we were discussing. The business interests of the companies are independent. They are subject to the owners there in terms of what they are likely to do. You will also see in the industry otherwise also such interests coexist between banks and some distant companies who have common ownership between their promoters. In fact, these companies that we are talking about are also very nascent in their business model. So it is also irrelevant in terms of their context as far as the bank is concerned. But yes, like you said, all directors and promoters or promoter group companies have to declare the interests to the bank on an annual basis. The bank examines those interests on an annual basis. The bank also certifies to RBI that we have found them to be fit and proper. The RBI also looks at this document and these facts when they visit us for their annual reviews. So this has been done with all necessary legal, technical approval.
There was talk that in that peace accord with the family, he spoke about his being chairman. Is that possible at all under the rules? If not CEO, he can be?
I think that has been misread or misunderstood in terms of how see, there is a context in the bank's articles. If you go back 15 years ago, it might be now a little bit out of context. And if you remember, late Mr. Ashok Kapoor was the bank's non-executive chairperson when the bank started. The articles therefore provided for those positions at that point in time. However, the current regulatory framework is very different. So as this few years have gone by, and you will notice with most private sector banks that the only person who can be a bank's chairperson is someone who is independent, and naturally someone who is of eminence. So it is something which is, in my opinion, being read out of context, because it might be of a structure of the past, but the current context of the structure is very different.
Just a reminder, viewers, briefly, Yes Bank has been battered in trade from the last month, but saw a brief rally after the management interview with CNBC TV18 and the kind of clarifications that the management posed to our questions. Moving on, in what comes as a huge relief for Anil Ambani's Reliance Communications, the Supreme Court today gave its go-ahead to their proposed spectrum trading deal with Reliance Jio Infocomm. Now, there's a condition, however. RCom would have to submit 1,400 crore rupees as corporate guarantee to the telecom department, that too in the next 2 days. Ashwin Kumar is here with the details. Ashwin, look at that stock. As soon as that news came out, it completely zoomed in trade, ending up by 11.7%, and that's a relief rally seen in the RCom stock almost after a month. Can they really furnish the 1,400 crore rupees in 2 days?
Well, big relief coming in for RCom. The apex court, by way of today's order, clearing the decks and ensuring that the spectrum sale deal goes through between RCom as well as RJio. Now, here are the facts of the case. The DOT had moved the Supreme Court in challenge to a TDSAT order of 1st of October, and that specific TDSAT order had struck down the DOT's demand seeking a bank guarantee of 2,900 crore rupees. Now, with having suffered defeat at the hands of the TDSAT, the DOT moved the Supreme Court, again making the same prayer, seeking that bank guarantee of 2,900 crore rupees in light of what they called were unpaid spectrum dues. Now, this was met with stiff opposition from RCom. RCom essentially argued that, one, they simply do not have the money, that the company is facing insolvency proceedings before the IBC, that it cannot furnish the bank guarantee. Moreover, RCom also went on to argue that the party that would suffer the most if this transaction is not allowed, it would be the lenders in question. The lenders have massive exposure, that lenders have extended public money, and that to secure the public money, it's critical that this transaction goes through. Now, that's an argument that the apex court appears to have bought into. It issued a two-part order today. The apex court, number one, held that as far as the bank guarantee is concerned, it relaxed that to a corporate guarantee. RCom now, by way of its sister concern, that's Reliance Realty, will have to furnish a corporate guarantee to the extent of 1,400 crore rupees, but they'll have to do so within 2 days' time by December 2nd. Subsequently, the DOT within 7 days, within a week's time, will have to furnish the required clearances and the required NOC. So in a manner of speaking, by way of this two-part order, the apex court clearing the decks for the spectrum sale deal between RCom and RJio. Back to you.
Thanks for joining us, Ashmit, with that report. And a standard disclaimer up on your screens. Reliance Industries, promoter of Reliance Jio, controls Network 18, which owns CNBC TV 18 as well. One of India's senior-most Supreme Court judges, Justice K.M. Joseph, has retired. His last day in office also happened to be his birthday. And he celebrated by cutting a cake ahead of his press conference. Justice Joseph was one of those 4 judges who held a press conference earlier this year against the then Chief Justice Deepak Mishra over alleged bench fixing. Justice Joseph told my colleague Ashwin Kumar that he has no regrets about going public, as that was the only way out.
Everybody is entitled to have his own perception on what we did. But I do not think that people who criticized probably knew what was the background in which we took up such a strong step. And what all steps we have taken prior to such a strong step. I can tell you, I was convinced that there was no other option. We have tried all other possible methods to see that things go on the right track. But all other attempts failed. Then we thought we'll discharge the debt to the nation and tell the nation that things are not on the right track.
Speaking of, again, the same press conference, knowing what you know now, if you were to look back, if you were to go back in time, would you find yourself doing the same thing again, the same press conference, given the context, given the crisis that you speak of?
There is no such a crisis now. So as to...
Would you do that, knowing what you know now, would you again do that?
Had there been such a crisis, I would have certainly done that, having taken all other steps possible to see that things could be brought on the right track.
Speaking of the issues, the trigger at that point, at least what fell from Justice Gogoi, was the assignment of cases was the immediate trigger. To what extent have these issues now been resolved, given that one of the proponents of the change, Justice Gogoi, is now the captain of the ship?
As you said, it's a trigger. But there are several issues, institutional issues. That was one of the issues, probably. There were several issues connected with that. But things have changed a lot thereafter. So the steps we have taken have yielded results.
Thousands of farmers marched towards Parliament to protest against the government today. Their demand is the same as what various farmer groups have been demanding for the last several months: a loan waiver and a higher minimum support price. The difference this time is that farmer anger is growing. They want a special session of Parliament as well, and that too just ahead of Rajasthan and Telangana elections. It couldn't have come at a worse time for the BJP. The protest also became a show of opposition unity. From Rahul Gandhi to Kejriwal to Farooq Abdullah to Sharad Pawar, almost the entire opposition was present there. Two things are clear: farmers' distress is likely to take centre stage in 2019 and also in the upcoming winter session of Parliament. Let's go across to our guest this evening. We are joined by Yogendra Yadav, President of Swaraj Abhiyan, D. Raja, Rajya Sabha MP and National Secretary of the CPI, BJP spokesperson Syed Zafar Islam, and Congress spokesperson Sanjay Jha will be with us as well. My first question to Yogendra Yadav. Thanks for waiting patiently, sir. Our first question: there was a lot of anger in that protest, as we saw today. You spoke about the next election being about the Jawan and the Kisan. But don't you think the presence of politicians across party lines, including Rahul Gandhi, Arvind Kejriwal, Sharad Pawar, that took away and diverted attention from the main sentiment at the protest today?
That's one way of looking at it, Parikshit. The other way of looking at it would be to say that for the first time, farmers were able to dictate, call tunes of politics. You see, farmers and politics cannot stay apart. Any major section of society cannot, should not stay apart from politics. What has been happening so far is that politicians have been using, politics has been using farmers, playing with them. That what is required is that farmers should be able to dictate the terms, they should be able to call the tunes. And I thought today, for once, something like that began to happen. Opposition parties came. Why have they taken it up? Don't we know the record of these opposition parties? Some of them are in state governments. What have they done for the farmers? Everyone in this country knows these facts. But what has happened is that now political parties feel, no, my God, farmers are important. We need to address them in order to win elections. This is how sentiment changes. So, to use your vocabulary, in the political market, the stock of the farmer has gone up. And that's not a bad news for the farmers, no matter what the intent of parties, both of the government or opposition is.
The stock of the market, the stock of the farmer has gone up. Let me take that to Zafar Islam. Zafar, are you a worried man today? Is the BJP worried? This couldn't have come at a worse time. 2019, just 5 months away. This is bang in the middle of assembly elections. The Parliament and the BJP will have to come up with some answers in the upcoming winter session. There is a demand for a special session of Parliament. There is a demand for passage of 2 key bills by these farmers. How is the BJP planning to address that?
Parikshit, let me tell you a few things, which is very, very important. As far as farmers are concerned, we are extremely, extremely committed, always committed for the welfare of the farmer and farming community. What is more important for all of us to realize that parties who are taking this as an opportunity are the people who may be behind this, the entire agitation and the entire whatever movement, Kisan movement they are calling it. These political parties actually have no other agenda. That's why they are doing this kind of exercise. But this will not work. This kind of stunt will not work because all the farmers, the genuine farmers know that there is one political party who has actually worked for to safeguard their interests. It is Bharatiya Janata Party, and I completely agree with
Zafar, on what
Yogendra
basis?
Yadav
What basis are you saying
these
that?
political parties
look
today,
at Madhya Pradesh, look at Gujarat, look at Rajasthan. Can you deny that garlic farmers are angry? Can you deny the fact that there are farmers in Madhya Pradesh who are selling their onions for about 1.2 rupees a kg? Can you deny the fact that there was a groundnut scam in the state of Gujarat?
Can I just respond to that? See, I'm not denying anything what you said. But can you deny this? That the Congress party who are ruling this country for ages have not done anything for the farmers and farming community? My question to everyone, including Sanjay Jain and Yogendra Yadav ji, that today they are talking about the Swaminathan Commission report implementation. When the Commission report has come in our regime, at least we have done many parts of that we have implemented, including giving better MSP. But
you know, Swaminathan, Mr. Swaminathan has put out a statement today.
Were they sleeping
Zafar,
on that?
Just hold on. MS Swaminathan has put out a statement today, and those excerpts are scathing not just for the BJP but for the Congress as well. You know, Sanjay Jha, I'm going to ask you this. Mr. Swaminathan today has reacted on this farmer protest that we're looking at. He has said, the demand for loan waiver comes from the present non-remunerative nature of farming and is indicative of the fact that economic viability is as important to farmers as to industrialists. Unfortunately, the then government did not take action on the national policy for farmers when the report was presented in 2007. Would you admit, Sanjay, that the Congress government is equally guilty of playing with farmer sentiments?
Dr. Manmohan Singh and the Congress UPA government recognized that we needed to do something special because we realized the agrarian crisis was not something to be treated as, you know, a periodic crisis every time you have a bad rainfall, but one that required structural reforms. Number two, a lot of the recommendations were actually implemented, one of them being the Food Security Act, the Kisan Credit Card. You had, you know, the price stabilization fund. Even Manrega was supposed to be a buffer for job losses. So there were many, and, you know, technology in terms of e-chopals, all of them began during our time.
For months, we've been hearing this in Parliament. Farmers should get MSP. Farmers should get MSP. What is Mr. Swaminathan saying? Although my report is over 10 years old, no action has been taken on its implementation, particularly with reference to the economics of farming. A formula was suggested for determining the minimum support price for farm produce. So over the last 10 years, you've had the Congress, you've had the BJP. Mr. Raja, do you feel that successive governments and even the opposition is not looking at the Swaminathan report?
I do agree with you. Successive governments have failed, have not taken adequate steps to address the concerns of our farmers, the farming community. Today, what is the reality? Farmers are passing through unprecedented distress. Agriculture is in deep crisis. Farmer suicides are increasing. What is the root cause for the suicide of farmers? It is indebtedness. Why farmers are in debt? Why they fall into debt trap? One should try to understand. And farmers do not get remunerative price for the produce. Agriculture has become non-remunerative, and MSP is a small step to compensate the loss incurred by the farmers. And Mr. Swaminathan gave his report, and this year is the 12th year for me in Rajya Sabha. When Mr. Swaminathan was member of Rajya Sabha, I was also in Rajya Sabha. We did raise the issue several times, and we wanted to discuss agrarian distress, agrarian crisis, farmers' distress. A few occasions we could find time under the rule which allows a short duration discussion. It means 2.5 hours. If we all insist, it extends to 4 hours or 5 hours. But Parliament could not find time to have a special sitting or a special session to discuss the agrarian crisis, farmers' distress. Why can't our Parliament decide to sit for a few days only to discuss the crisis in agriculture and the farmers' distress? And we have been asking, and in fact, the Parliament
Mr. Raja,
is not meeting for adequate number of days.
Mr. Raja, now asking,
days.
let's have a special session. Let's have a discussion over the next few days. Mr. Raja, I'll just get at Yogendra Yadav at this point. Mr. Yadav, this C2, cost plus 50% formula, is talked about very often. But why are successive governments shying away from this formula? The Congress knew about it, the UPA knew about it, Zafar knows about it, but why is it never implemented? And off record, BJP leaders say it will create a national crisis.
Money. Because it costs money. The easiest thing in the world is to give dialogues for farmers, and the toughest thing is to actually take money out of your pocket, because it would mean politically prioritizing farmers, because it would constrain your ability to do much else that you want to do. So clearly, unless there is a political will to support the farmers, this is very hard to implement. The difference is, let's say, in the case of paddy, if you go by the current formula suggested by Mr. Jaitley, you would pay only 1,750 rupees per quintal. But if you were to go by the C2 plus 50%, the original Swaminathan formula, the formula being demanded, it will be 2,340 rupees. 600 rupees of a difference. For farmers, this is their real margin. For government, this is a lot of money. So it's a question of your political priorities. And that's why I think the developments of the last 2 days are so important, because this is how political will gets generated.
Zafar, do you think that there will be a special session of Parliament as is being demanded? Everyone is talking about the farmers' crisis. It's probably the best time for the BJP to make things transparent, to put things fair and square. Will that happen, Zafar? What's your sense?
See, before I respond to you, let me, since Mr. Yogendra Yadav understands this sector very well, I must also, and he has spoken about few things, and if you really see what we have done in last 4.5 years, we have implemented, we have created market for them, because for price realization, better remuneration can happen only where they have a better realization of their produce, and that is that can happen if there is a discovery, a better price discovery mechanism.
Sanjay, how will you make sure, how will the Congress make sure that there is a constructive special session on farmers, or will it be a washout?
Well, let me tell you, we completely back the fact that there must be a special session of Parliament dedicated to farmers. This government is, by the way, not even releasing data on farmer suicides for the last couple of years. Can you imagine how shameful, what shameful standards have we reached today? This is how apathetic and cold they are. They call farmers urban Maoists.
Mr. Raja, I'd like to give you the final word. What is expected in this upcoming session of Parliament, sir? As a member of the opposition, as a parliamentarian, what can the farmers expect from you?
Farmers have great expectations. That is why farmers in thousands have come from different parts of the country to the national capital to knock at the doors of Parliament. Indian Parliament is supreme in our democracy. It represents the will of the people. If that is so, farmers' grievances must be discussed in Parliament, and we want Parliament. The winter session should be productive and it should function, but it is for the government. Instead of discussing farmers' issue, if they start discussing construction of temple and passing the legislation or bringing ordinance, then it will be onus on the part of government, whether government is keen to have Parliament session or not.
All right, Mr. Raja, let's just hope that there can be a constructive session of Parliament and there can be a special session as the farmers are demanding as well. Yogendra Yadav, D. Raja, Sanjay Jha, Syed Zafar Islam. Thank you very much for joining us on CNBC TV 18.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi met the Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the summit. He also met Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Both the leaders decided to set up a mechanism at the leadership level to scale up the Saudi Arabia investments in energy, infrastructure and defence sectors in India. Meanwhile, the president of Argentina, Mauricio Macri, shook hands with the global leaders at the summit, got officially underway with a photo op. Now, over the weekend, investors around the world will be a close watch on the much-awaited Xi Jinping-Trump meeting. Remember, Trump has already threatened to impose further tariffs on Chinese imports if talks between them do not prove to be fruitful. Trump, meanwhile, has already called off his scheduled meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, citing the tensions in Ukraine. But back home, the Nitin Gadkari-headed Road Transport and Highway Ministry has come out with its budget wish list. With around 2 months to go, we learned from sources that ministry has sought about 1,20,000 crore rupees from the Finance Ministry for the next fiscal. The National Highways Authority of India, meanwhile, has sought about 30,000 crore rupees. Let's go across to our correspondent Anu Sharma, who has been tracking that story. Anu, take us through what your sources are telling you with respect to that wish list.
So sources have told us that the Road Transport and Highways Ministry is likely to have asked for over 1,20,000 crore rupees in the budgetary allocation for the next financial year starting April 1. While they have asked for over 1,20,000 crore, the ministry is hopeful that it will get at least somewhere around 83,000 crore rupees in the next fiscal. Coming to the second supplementary demand for grants, sources tell us that the ministry is expecting an increase of over 7,600 crore rupees, which will take the revised estimate for the current financial year to around 78,000 crore rupees. Now, coming to National Highways Authority of India, sources tell us that the capital expenditure target for NHAI for the entire fiscal has been set at around 1,40,000 crore rupees, out of which 75,000 crore rupees will be the borrowing limit. Now, the 75,000 crore rupees will be higher than the current year's borrowing limit of around 62,000 crore rupees, basically because the fund requirements are seen higher in the next fiscal because a lot of projects will be in the maturity stage. Now, whether NHAI will be able to borrow this entire amount of 75,000 crore rupees will depend on the amount it finally gets from the budgetary allocation of Union Budget 2019-20.